This is the Beach Preservation Ad Hoc Committee meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that the press and public were duly notified of the meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. Today, we have a host of people from the Army Corps of Engineers. They travel in packs. I like it. So thank you all for being here. Nancy Parrish is the planning chief. Some of you may have met Glenn Jeffries, who is a Sullivan's Island resident and is chief of corporate communications for them. On Zoom, we have Stephen Trainum, Scott Pierce in the room. So Nancy, I'm going to let y'all take it away. This group has been meeting for 7 or 8 go-rounds, maybe 2.5 months or so, put together by City Council. Some are City Council, some are residents. And this group's been charged with trying to figure out a way to create sustainable funding mechanisms, look at alternatives. We've talked to a number of experts, and y'all are certainly one of those we wanted to have in to hear the program. So we'll just let you take it.
All right.
Thank you all again for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me out here. And I apologize that it has taken us a little while to get ourselves organized and get out here, but as Mayor Pounds and I were chatting before we started, that's just kind of the pace of government, right? We should set those expectations early. So, again, my name is Nancy Parrish. I am the Chief of Planning and Environmental Branch with the Charleston District of the Army Corps of Engineers. I have been asked to come talk to y'all about making the beachfront out here part of the federal beach program, what that takes and what the requirements are. So hopefully that's what you guys want to hear about. Yeah, those are the slides I prepared. All right, so we can hop right into it. I don't know if the guys online can see my slides, but you're honestly not missing much in terms of slides. They're more to help me, I think, remember what I want to say. But
if you send them to us after, we can make sure the entire group receives a copy.
Yep, that'll work. Essentially, the two main criteria to become a federal beach are that there must be public access every half mile or more. And I think you guys have that down pat, like not a problem.
Most of the way.
Most of the way.
So if we don't,
It's ours.
Right. We're good. Go ahead.
And don't be afraid to ask questions and interrupt me. I've got no script, so I tend to just make it up as I go. Sure, and I put a note in here because I think it's really important here particularly. Shores that are owned by private beach clubs or hotels and publicly owned beaches that are limited use, just that community, do not qualify for the federal program, right? So the whole point of the federal program is that these are public access, public beaches. You know, they need to be made accessible. So the second criteria related is there has to be adequate parking that is free or reasonably priced and available to everybody on equal basis. So, you know, whether we're coming from the mainland out to the island or you live here, you can't be a disparity in who's allowed to park where. Christopher Mims, my colleague over here, he did a lot of research into the improvements in parking that y'all have done recently. And we feel like, with the parking situation here on the island is adequate to meet our requirements. I even sent some questions up our policy chain because I don't want to, I wouldn't want to ask you guys to get involved in something only to be shot down over something as simple as parking that we could have anticipated. So I sent some questions up our policy chain, and they were all like, "Oh yeah, I think that'll do. That shouldn't be a problem." So it's in delving into the policy, it's very vague, and it's written that way so that specific circumstances in a particular location can be considered, on their own merits instead of just a cookie cutter. So that is very helpful for you here, I think. All right. So what does it mean to become part of our federal family? What does it take to get there? We call these civil works projects as opposed to like a military construction project, right? These are the ones we do for the public. Beach work is considered coastal storm risk management. It is not a recreation. We're not putting it out there so that the beach is more enjoyable, although that happily it is, as a result. But our mission is to reduce the risk of damages from like hurricanes and those nor'easters and whatever else comes through here. We build the beach template with a dune and enough sand so that when something comes ashore, it churns at that sand before it comes to any of the homes or, hotels, we have Myrtle Beach, that we protect. It keeps that wave attack from reaching structures and homes. So that's the goal, that's the point of our civil works projects. So all of our projects have 3 phases throughout their life cycle. We start with a feasibility study. So when we begin a process, say with Isle of Palms, the first thing we would do is a feasibility study. It takes about 3, I have that's on another slide, but it's about a 3-year study where we look into all of the policy details about qualifying, if you will. We look at the economic benefits of the government investing in the beach, and to what extent we can invest. So that's how much sand. We'll develop a template, we call it, but a dune design that is the one that we think is the best return on the federal investment. So that's our angle on this. It's not necessarily what you want most or what the citizens think is the best, but it becomes what the federal government is willing to invest in. And then we can talk about if Isle of Palms wants something more or different, like how we can accommodate a local preference, a locally preferred plan on that. So that happens during the feasibility phase. We knock all that out. That's when we will generate cost estimates for placing sand on the beach. We will we'll calculate the interval at which the beach would then need to be renourished, right, through the natural erosion process and taking into account the storms and those kinds of things. We end up calculating an interval that's something like, it's often 7 to 9 years that we would come out and do a regular renourishment. And that's all kind of part of the plan. We would generate costs for all of that as well. We get that agreed to within our agency. Our chief of engineers signs off, it goes to Congress. We look for authorization of that plan. And then we can move into our construction phase, which begins with detailed engineering plans and specs, which I always think it's a beach dune. How hard is that? But apparently engineers think that's challenging. We'll say. I guess.
Your comrades are laughing in your face.
Yeah. None of them are engineers either. I am not an engineer, I should say. I actually started my career as an archaeologist, so I know nothing about what it takes to design a dune. But
You can dig one up there.
yeah. But I know people who do, right? We have those people. We have that expertise. They will do the detailed plans and specs before we award a contract to then place the sand.
And did you say what the timeline for that was?
So the feasibility study is usually 3 years, sometimes about 4, but not usually longer than that. If we get it authorized by Congress right away, then we can move into the pre-construction design phase, like as soon as it's authorized by Congress, and that we get appropriations. It's always about appropriations for us.
Can you get a permit while?
Can we
it's
just make
feasibility?
sure you use your mics, please?
Can you get a permit while the feasibility study is still going on?
A permit for.
For renourishment, say we wanted to go ahead and build the beach back up, but we want to get under the federal beach plan. So can we have a permit in order and working to get it, renourish a beach, and then,
During that 3 or 4 year feasibility or how
Right.
long before we get.
because we might not have time to, time is of the essence if we
Right.
keep losing beach by the time we get all the feasibility studies and
Right.
so forth.
I don't know, I expect so, but I can find out if one of you would write that question down. We'll get it. That's why they're there, to help us remember. I think that's a great question, because, yes, looking from today forward, it's gonna be quite a while before we would be placing sand, assuming the feasibility studies suggest we should.
And, hey, Stephen, I know you're on. If you need to jump in, feel free. Stephen's our coastal engineer for us, for CSE.
Now that you threw them under the bus. So I
Yeah,
have,
I'll let's say you can get a permit, completely would be separate from what the core building does.
Okay.
So it happened, this project's, all places out to beach, both were doing independent projects while the just appropriations process is going on.
Okay.
But that would mean that that permit that the city would be getting separately from this process, would that, let's say the Army Corps of Engineers feasibility study get approved and then it's appropriated, you all would be able to execute the project that was permitted by the city separately?
So the city, if the city wants to place sand, so what I heard Stephen say is that you would be able to get a permit and place sand while we're going through our big process. So if the city did that and place sand.
So that would be completely
would be on the
separate
city.
from design to permit to implementation?
Right, and it's not going to stop us from being able to implement
Correct,
ours.
okay.
We might, our first placement might be smaller because, you've just placed sand or
Correct,
whatever, but.
okay.
But y'all would not be using our permit? Like,
Correct.
That's, I think that's.
Correct, I think
Yeah.
that you all design from the big, from start to finish, it's your entire project.
You're right.
Yeah.
And then as regards that period for the feasibility study, what would that entail for the city as regards expense or manpower, or what role would the city play in getting through that 3 to 4 years?
Yep, that's a good question. I'm going to switch slides just because I tend to talk and forget that I have the slides. This is our feasibility study process. It kind of breaks down what those 3 years look like. And that's a good question. We partner with the city to do the feasibility study. There is a 50/50 cost share to do feasibility. Our policy right now is that feasibility study should cost $3 million total. So that's, $1.5 million from the city. We call you our non-federal sponsor or cost share partner in that. I don't want to say we don't care where you get your money, but we don't care where you get your money. As long as it is not federal dollars that you're bringing as your non-federal share, you can get that however you choose. I mean, whether that's a bond or you partner with somebody else, or I've seen all kinds of deals that our non-federal sponsors will do in order to be able to get the money they need. We just have one signatory, which would be the city most likely. So, and then you'd have a seat at the table, as we say. To do a feasibility study, we set up what we call a project delivery team. And it's all of our multidisciplinary, it's got the engineers, it's got the archaeologists, the environmental staff who do all of that environmental compliance that has to happen. We do all of that NEPA throughout this process. We have our corporate communications on there, real estate professionals. Anyway, it's usually a pretty big team, multidisciplinary, and the city is part of that team. Like, we want you at the meetings weekly or biweekly. Some partners choose not to participate as actively as others, but from our perspective, the more you participate, the better. You have a say in how we're forming this study, this plan for you. So that would be the participation level.
Nancy, I know y'all have done a little bit of analysis work on IOP already. Do you have situations where municipalities or areas go through this process and it's a no?
Yes, we have, honestly. It doesn't happen very often, and I will tell you that the Corps doesn't like to say no. We just really don't. So we will kind of work and figure and, see what we can do to get to yes most of the time. I have been on a couple of studies where there just isn't a way to get there, but in those cases, it's because there were not enough damages happening. Like, the flooding wasn't actually impacting people, which is very rarely the case on a barrier island, right? So that shouldn't be a problem. Like I say, I've talked to people up our chain of command, our policy folks on the parking issue, so that shouldn't be a problem.
And we know the Wild Dunes issue, so it feels like we're set up.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I mean, to me, looking at it, it's kind of like from Wild Dunes down.
Yeah.
Like, they would have to be excluded, but
Yeah.
they can also do what they need to do.
So that's how that works, is that you just don't deal, like, that would just be
Right.
as if it was not part of the beach.
Correct.
So
Right.
just because it's connected to us doesn't make it.
Right, right.
Okay.
And it could be that, I feel like, I can't remember which beach it is now, but like a portion of the beach, but like this part didn't meet the criteria, not because it was private the way Wild Dunes is, but just
some
from an
other reason.
economic perspective. But like I said, that's what the team figures out when we do the study.
So the state plan that we operate under right now, for our beach management plan, we have reaches that were established by, I assume coastal engineers. And, the last one is at a beach access path that pushes what the state considers our publicly accessible beach beyond the boardwalk, the kind of that Grand Pavilion area that's technically Wild Dunes. Does the federal government kind of follow along? Like if there's an access path at 57th, and the state deems that to be a quarter of a mile on each side, and I think y'all said maybe like a half
It's-
a
we're
mile.
the
So
same.
would
We're
it
the
push
same.
us, okay, so we might actually
Catch a little bit.
catch
of
a
that.
little bit, okay.
I think it would depend on the parking, where the parking is in relation to that access path at 57.
And that's how that calculation came about, because there is public parking very close to that
Yeah, within
last
a
beach
half
access
mile.
path, and about a quarter mile would qualify.
Well, I think we got a, kind of a,
Half a mile.
It's a
Right,
half
yes.
mile.
Yeah.
It's
But
a
I mean, we
half mile
got-
access, so people over here only walk a quarter mile, and people from this side only walk a quarter mile to
right,
get to it, right?
correct, yeah. And we got a little bit of a, I think we got
Nancy, can I
a,
ask you, go ahead.
I think we got a little bit of a.
That's a quick question. Okay.
Zip it, Scott. I'll be done in just 1 second. And I think we did get some sort of special dispensation because the parking there is actually on Palm Boulevard, which is where the good parking is versus these side streets. So it may be a little further than the state deemed access, reasonable access, well, not reasonable, it's not unreasonable, but it's just a little further than that footage mark, but have cleared it and it's fine.
Yeah, and I think these guys, their initial look, high level, was about at the boardwalk. Yeah. Scott?
Yeah, just two questions. Is the federally funded appropriations track separate from what your efforts are? Is that something we have to take on ourselves to get the money appropriated? And secondly, when you typically do a renourishment project, is it covered entirely by the federal funds, or do we have a cost-sharing formula that you typically apply to those so that we can plan for that if we were to pursue this?
Yep, yeah, no, you're getting ahead of me, but those are very good questions. So as I said, when we go through feasibility, we get that signed by our chief of engineers, who right now is Lieutenant General Spellman. We ask Congress to authorize that, and then we need appropriations. This is for the initial construction.
And all that's an Army Corps task.
That is all on us and on Congress. So we get that signed, we pass it up to Congress, and then we hope. And if you have conversations with your congressional, that never hurts. So, but we can't lobby them. All we can do is put it up there and say, hey, this has been approved by our chief of engineers. It needs to be funded. This island's getting battered. Authorization is easier to get than appropriation, right? I mean, all they have to do is say, yeah, that's a good idea. And they put that into a Water Resources Development Act and say, yeah, you are now authorized to do this project, which is great because the authorization never goes away. Once it's been authorized, that stays on the books. I used to work in Fort Worth, Texas with the Corps, and we would do projects on authorizations from like the 20s and 30s. So they really do stay out there.
Is that the same for this whole feasibility study? Like, that's a one-time deal? Okay.
We only have to do the feasibility. It's a one-time deal. It does sort of expire after about 50 years.
That's
But
I'm in.
so, yeah. Anyway, so then I'm trying to get back to your question, Scott. We do get into construction, and construction is cost shared 65% federal, 35% non-federal, so local. And again, wherever you get your non-federal share, I mean, if you're selling cupcakes on the street corners, like whatever, however it gets there, is fine with us. And that is for a regular construction, so our initial construction, and regular renourishment. So like I said, during feasibility, we'll decide that, based on the movement here, it's every 7, 9 years, whatever it is, whatever's appropriate based on how the sand moves, we're gonna come back out and do regular renourishment.
Can I ask one more quick question?
Yeah.
The timeframe from Okay, so if we go through the feasibility study and then the congressional appropriation and then deployment, et cetera, do you have like a typical total time frame from the time somebody goes through the study to the time sand arrives on the beach? Is it another year or two after the feasibility study? And I'm just trying to, broad strokes, nothing, no
Sure.
commitment here.
So let's say feasibility is 3.5 to 4 years, including getting it into the Water Resources Development Act for authorization. So we've got 3 or 4 years there, to 2 years on the pre-construction engineering design stuff, because dunes are harder to design than I think they are. And then, and as soon as we award that first contract, then we're in construction and we'll start placing sand. So I would say, I lost count.
7 years.
5 to
7 or
7
8,
years.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Four to, at the.
Assuming we
at the
get
absolute
appropriations.
earliest, 4.5.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it could be the only thing that really slows it down is if after authorization, if we don't get appropriations from Congress to get started, we might have to sit and wait.
Somebody get a mark on that decibel level, please.
Can't help it.
If we're authorized and we are, we've been through the feasibility, we're authorized, and we're just waiting on money, is there a scenario where we could come up with all the money? I mean, would you act on what you've gotten to that point if we just said, okay, well, here's our wallet?
Yes, there are, and I think that's a great question. It requires, definite signatures on specific legal documents to allow you to place sand in advance of our funding, but it would still be considered, if we get all the paperwork squared away before you put the sand out, then we consider that sand federal, then you are, that's a federal beach. And the advantage to that, and we'll talk more about in a minute, but is that when there's a storm and it tears up your beach, it has to tear it up a certain amount, right? Has it caused real damage, the federal government comes back in and replaces that sand at full federal funding. So regular renourishments, when we're doing our regular scheduled oil changes on the car, you have to pay 35%. But when there is an emergency action, when there's a storm, something like that, the advantage to being a federal beach is that the government comes in and replaces that sand at full federal expenses. So you don't pay the 35% for that. It takes us a minute. I will say, we are currently.
We're learning that.
Yeah, we're currently putting sand on the beach at Folly from Hurricane Ian, and this summer we'll do Myrtle Beach.
Does it have to be a named storm?
No, it does not. It just has to cause a certain amount of damage.
That's right.
Question. I have this perception that federal beach projects typically cost much more than a locally bid project. So for us, 35% of a $30 million project may be the same as a project that we design, permit, and bid on our own. Is that a correct perception, or?
I think it's probably fairly accurate. I mean, the downside of the federal government is that our contractors know our pockets are deep. They charge us differently than they do a municipality of your size. So, yeah, that could be the case. I think, the payoff is when there's storms.
Yeah, that's what I was.
You know what I mean? It's kind of like having
100%'s good.
a big insurance policy.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, you might be paying a little more for it, but at the end of the day, the payout is that we'll come in.
Are you aware of what we're experiencing right now? I mean, I know you've looked at our beach some, but would this situation qualify as what did you say, certain amount of damage?
Oh, yeah.
Or does it have to be one?
It's
day?
usually an event.
Okay.
It is usually a storm of some kind, just that's the nature of the problems.
So like the December 17th nor'easter probably,
probably count,
would have
yes.
probably counted given the amount of
Yes.
damage. Okay.
Yeah.
But we'd be waiting a year or two to actually get that sand, probably. I mean, if you're doing if you're doing Folly after Ian.
Yeah.
Right, and I will say at Folly and Myrtle Beach both, we had environmental compliance that we had to do because it had been such a long time since we'd done the feasibility
Okay.
work, and that delayed some of it.
Okay.
You know, if we've just finished feasibility and all of our environmental compliance is very recent and fresh, then that process will probably be a little quicker. Our contracting process is long regardless, right? It takes several months for us to award a contract, especially the big ones to the dredge companies that come do that work.
So even though the feasibility study, you only have to do that once, there are some other studies that would need to be done more frequently,
Right, and
like the environmental.
right,
that
the
you
environmental,
mentioned.
and a lot of that, things don't change, you know, like the beachfront is the beachfront. The environmental resources don't change very much, and if we're placing sand the same way every time using the same methodology, then we can usually, our compliance is just like, hey, nothing's changed, are we good to go? And we
Okay.
kind of get a, you know, yeah, you can continue. We don't usually have to restart over. I think for Folly, we did because they changed how they're going to pipe the sand. Like it's a different path.
So two questions. One, and they go together, so I'll ask them both. One would be whether this is a permanent situation whereby the city could never at any time in the next 50 years say, things have changed, it's only a two-island person now, like, could they make a change and say, we no longer want to be part of the program? And two, well, actually, it's three questions. What is the city giving up in order to have this? Is there any negative or downside to the city or the property owners? And then, you know, three, what other requirements would the city have ongoing once this all happens that we need to be aware of that might change the way the city does business now?
No, those are good questions.
Okay.
I won't necessarily answer them in the same order. Yes, but what people give up, what the city's giving up. One of the things that's kind of contentious when we do these projects are what we call a perpetual easement. The city is required to get a perpetual easement for all of the land that is considered part of the project. Which is not the entire beach or the entire island, like we talked about. It's just whatever is going to be the part of the federal beach. That easement allows us, and this is from the landowners that are, you know, beachfront. The easement allows us to come and place sand, right? It is, that's really all it is. It's for us to be able to do our construction work, place the sand, and then do our inspection. So there's an annual inspection of completed works.
And that's 100% the property owners.
Yeah, it has to be all the property owners, and they have to sign this perpetual easement. I mean, you can talk to neighbors up and down the coast that are having issues
Yeah.
with some of this. There's misperception about what that allows the government to do on these people's land. All it allows us to do is place the sand. It doesn't make it government property, it doesn't make it public property, it doesn't allow for the public to be places they wouldn't be otherwise, you know what I mean, that they shouldn't be. But it is causing a problem. You know, in the past, we've kind of, as an agency, not really done that, but Florida got into a lot of trouble. They have a lot of problems for not having got the perpetual easements, and so now the agency-wide is really towing the line on this particular policy.
So should that be step one? I mean, I'm just imagining we spend $3 million, we go through 3 or 4 years, and then we have one person that says no.
Yep, and that's absolutely the case on plenty of beaches.
Which is happening at Polly's.
So
right
it's
now.
happening in Polly's, it's real bad there.
There's like
Can we,
three
I mean, I
people.
said that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but can we do that first? Can we get those easements?
I don't know what that means.
Before we start the process?
I mean, I guess you could, I think there may be some issues with, so getting those easements is part of your responsibility in construction, part of that 35% that this non-federal sponsor is responsible for. lands, easements, rights of ways, relocations, and dredge material disposal are all things that the non-federal sponsor must pay for. And it's that 35%, like whatever those costs are part of your 35% responsibility. If we do a piece of that out in front, I don't know that then would count as part of your 35% anymore.
But you're just talking about getting us documents.
I'm just concerned that, I'm fairly certain that we would have at least one.
Yeah.
All people are different. Takes all kinds, as my
Right.
grandmother would say.
Right.
Well, you'd also run into timing, because if you did get 100% in the front end, I mean, just talking about the worst-case scenario, by the time this process goes through is when the easements need to be, you have ownership changes of property.
Well, and so it's a perpetual
Well, actually, it would
easement.
go with it, it would go with
Yes.
the property,
Yeah.
so good, so
Exactly.
yes. So
And that's why we
thank
get
you.
a perpetual easement, so that when people move, we don't have to get it again. Or if it's been 9 years since the last time we were out here, we don't have to go seek
Right.
those or there's an emergency. You've had a storm, and now we're trying to find people who don't live here year-round, and get signatures on things. So that's why we get the perpetual easements in the beginning, so we can always get out when we need to.
Hey, Stephen, you have a question or
Sorry.
comment? That's all right.
I've got,
Yeah.
Let me get to Stephen.
Just one particular, the one issue that can come up with that is the landward boundary of the easement is generally set based off of the Corps' design. So if you try to get easements before that design is put in place, you just would have to make sure that easement line was well landward of any potential, place where that, the Corps would want to draw that line. I always recommend getting them as far landward as possible, to account for future storms and things, but that just creates more issues with the property owner. So, just one thing you want to consider trying to get it ahead of time.
Thank you for that. I hadn't really thought about it like that, and I appreciate it.
that was my question. Where does your jurisdiction begin? Is that the property line, the critical line setback?
It's going to be at that perpetual easement.
Perpetual.
I mean, based on
On your survey?
on the dune, and the dune is based on what we think is necessary to protect.
And would you need perpetual easements for the entire beachfront from Breach Inlet to the limit on the north end, regardless of whether there's some areas where there's no need? Like for right now, the middle center of the island is accretional, doesn't have, there's no emergency, we don't anticipate it, changing. Obviously, that's the same situation we had at Breach Inlet, it changed in a year, but would you need, before articulating a specific project, you would need perpetual easements for the entire area that would be eligible,
Right.
regardless of
Right.
whether there's a project on the horizon or not?
Correct. Right, so, even if the project is this long, but there's enough sand here, so our first placement is only, we still need those easements down there across the entire project area, so that in future, when it is time to put sand at other locations, we've got the easements in place, because it can take years, right? Ask Polly's, it can take a really long time, and if somebody's in desperate need, then.
So you define a project area, the entire stretch of beach that's eligible?
Right, and
Not-
that's what gets defined during feasibility.
Okay,
Well,
I guess that's,
actually,
in my mind, I'm thinking project area is the defined area where we know we have a need, but you're saying it's the entire.
and feasibility will tell us whether it's the entire thing or whether it just turns out that there's no need in one location.
Okay.
And it won't be part of the federal project. So, and that means when a storm does come, if they're not part of the federal project, we're not going to be putting sand there.
And that's the analysis that you make based on the current conditions and what it would take to protect that area from
Right.
a coastal storm perspective.
Right,
Okay.
right.
And is there a standard easement form that y'all have?
Yes.
Okay, so it'd be good to see that, when you go through the process.
You bet we do.
It's the federal government, you know they do.
You bet there is.
Yeah.
Well, I believe.
We based our.
Do we have?
Yes, that's what I was,
our
we
easement
already have
documents.
some easements
Yeah.
for a stretch that we've been working on for a while now. And
Right.
my understanding, it was patterned after the Army
Yeah.
Corps because it contains all of the provisions that you
things,
need,
yeah.
all the things you need, yes. So there's some familiarity, at least for a certain stretch for this document.
So
Of course, it's
just,
not perpetual.
so for, I think the question, just to make sure I understand this, so it's it would not be unusual to have a beach like ours that portions of it were not part of the project, the larger forever project. I mean,
Right.
so we might have stretches of this beach that you all would not consider as part of your
Right,
domain.
right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
Because the federal government's looking at where's the best place for that federal investment. And so there might be spots it's like, well, it's not worth spending the federal dollars there. The other side of that coin is like if there are holes, if you will, like
Yeah.
spots in it, and we come out to place sand, and you want to put sand on one of those areas that is not part of the federal project, like you can piggyback on our contract, then you don't have to pay that mob and demob cost. Like it reduces your costs
Yeah.
tremendously. They're already out there placing sand, and so we do that a lot. Where folks are allowed to hop on our contract because the dredge is there. So I mean, it's not the greatest, but there is a little,
And we could still do our own projects in between and stuff like that if we wanted to.
right. And Scott, I want to make sure I got to all of your questions, but you just reminded me of one question, which I think was related to can you do other things on the beach and what are the restrictions? Once it's a federal project, then in addition to any permitting you might, as a private citizen, might need from the Corps of Engineers to come across the dune, I'm just trying to think or development that wants to go under the beach, where you might need a Corps of Engineers permit for something, but for placement of sand in the water, there is an additional permitting process. We call it Section 408, and just because we're the government, that's how we name things. It's, it's a section of a law, like whatever. But it basically, it gives us the opportunity to review any plans that someone has that might impact a federal project, to ensure that whatever changes they're making don't alter the purpose and function of the federal project. So we put up a dune for a reason, and it's a certain size for a reason. If someone wants to come in and knock down part of the dune because they want to have a deck, they're going to build a deck out there. That impacts the ability of that dune to function, right? Because now you've put a hole in a line of defense. And so we would tell them, no, you can't do that. And we might, what we try and do, and this is the same with all of our permitting, we will try and work with that person to figure out what they can do. Like what they can do to sort of get the deck they need without impacting the function of the federal project. So it does add a, fun layer of bureaucracy onto things that people want to do that might affect that dune in the future.
That would be like a walkover.
Walkover, sort of.
Walkovers.
From
So-
Build a
property
deck
to the
of-
beach.
Yeah, no, I know what you meant, but Christopher Mims here, that's with us today, actually administers our 408 program, as well as he does the inspections. We come out and do inspections annually for O&M and stuff.
It would be like a walkover, but we could also.
Can you, if you're going to come up to the mic, we got folks watching.
Walkover could be an example, but we could include things such as that in the authorization of the federal project and allow the non-federal sponsor to administer certain permissions. For example, if we determined in the design that walkovers were needed and appropriate, we could put that in there. And so it may be that some specific things like that wouldn't need to come to the Corps for permission. Of important note too, we do not evaluate someone's request without the statement of no objection from the non-federal sponsor. So if someone came to us and requested something, we would coordinate that with you all.
So that would have to go through our DHAC or OCRM and the city.
If it needed a permit that was subject to their rules for South Carolina DEC, if you were referring to that, then it would perhaps need that in addition.
Yeah, I believe that, or I could be wrong about this, Douglas, but I think that the walkovers are a DHEC authorization that we then issue a permit for locally. We're not the ones in charge of determining whether that's
They're
allowable.
exempt from state permitting, as long as there are certain width, below a certain width, and they just go through the city currently. Sounds like potentially it would be the same way for the Army Corps. If they're already pre-authorized, we would just be permitting them individually if they were already part of the project.
So DHEC has what's called a general permit that's already issued a permit for those dune walkovers. And so as long as you're abiding by the guidelines
Terms
that
of
are
the general.
within that, then you can assume that you have the state permit in that case. And so if we included that dune walkovers were permissible in the design of the project, then you wouldn't need a separate 408 as the city to authorize individuals that came to you.
All right, that's why, that's,
Why you
I
brought
love
smart people
Christopher.
with you.
That's right.
yeah.
I want to be sensitive to time, because I know we have a couple of folks that are going to need to leave a little bit before 10. Nancy, so
I got one more slide, honestly.
perfect. Because I mean, we need to frame this in kind of, the relationship is a 50-year relationship. What's the cost-benefit analysis? That's some work we'll need to do, but you rock on.
Yeah, and that is the work that we do during feasibility, to like, we assess you back.
Never mind. Yeah.
No, I'm teasing. I'm teasing. But anyway, like I said, this is kind of just my last sum up slide, and the questions are great. I think the questions are better than a presentation can be. But if you are interested in getting this started and talking about doing a feasibility study and trying to make this happen, it starts with a letter from the city, right, just to our commander, right here in town. And currently, that is Lieutenant Colonel Robert Nahabedian. He'll be with us for another year and a half. If it takes y'all longer than that to get us a letter, we'll let you know who to send it to. And that's, once we get that letter from you, we'll start a budgeting package, for that $3 million feasibility study, and we will send that up through our chain. Budgeting with the federal government is a 3-year process. So we are currently working on the 2027 budget. So that would be the soonest we could get you into our budgeting, into the budget, through our official channels. And that's the president's budget and the official budgets that come out. Lots of congressional folks like to do earmarks. They're back, right? They call them something else now, but they are earmarks. And that just depends on your relationships and if you can convince someone to throw some money out sooner than FY27, because they can budget, Congress budgets, and they do it on their own schedule, right? I mean, they produce one every year, and so they can put whatever they want into it each year. We have to start 3 years out, so we're executing one, planning the next, and it's a 3-year schedule for us. So that's what we would do. As soon as we got that letter, we would start building that package to make sure it gets included in the FY27 budget ask. That doesn't mean that we'll get the money necessarily, right? Because again, that is up to Congress. All we can do is ask for it and keep asking for it. So it's a slow start. But again, then you've got a 50-year partner, and I was talking to my boss last night, and she's like, "Well, it's got a 50-year life, but if we need to come out in year 52 and put sand out there, we will, right? We're going to come out anyway because you're still a federal project to us. Until it is deauthorized by Congress, it is still a federal project to us. So we take care of it. We just kind of don't guarantee that the profile is exactly perfect anymore." Because it's perfect until then. But, but you know what I mean? Like, that's as far in the future as we can assume, predict what that erosion rate is going to be like, what the storms are going to be like. And after that, it may not be as effective, but we're still going to come out and at least give you that much.
But it feels like, there's a 3-year feasibility study on your end, but it feels like there's work on the city's end to do our own feasibility before we even submit a letter. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud more than anything, but it just feels like.
Those easements.
Say again?
Those easements.
Yeah, well, the easements, and Desiree, to your point, if we have a placeholder in our budget now for a $17 million project.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you did it, it might be a $30 million project, and we're paying 35%. It's like,
Right.
to your point, I mean, it's the insurance policy and how many storms in 50 years and how many renourishments in 50
Right.
years and how much is, on the city's dime. I mean, that seems like some work that needs to happen before we move further to me.
Right. I would recommend send the letter, because it's gonna take till
Yeah.
2027 anyway. That gives you a few years to do your homework, because by then, if you decide this is not for you, you just say, no, thanks, right? We don't have to pursue it. And really, at any point throughout this process, like feasibility, in design, I mean, any point you can say, we don't actually, we've decided we don't want to do this.
So it's
Or
just the
whatever.
first granule of sand that touches the beach. It's the, we were locked in at that point.
Yeah, once we start placing sand, that's your sand. So, that we don't, there's no
But-
take backs.
But to the question of what we give up, I mean, we could still, you know, if we wanted more or whatever, I mean, we could still add sand, you know, your normal maintenance is 5 to 7 years, but if we felt and wanted to spend our own money after 3 years, I mean, we'd have to get permission, but we could probably
Right,
do
we'd have to work
that.
that out together. I'm
So
gonna let you answer that, because I don't think I know.
I'll answer a real quick thing about, kind of goes back to the permit. So if you wanted to do work before it was an approved federal project, you would need a permit, right? We talked about that. Well, the federal government, we don't have to permit ourselves. And once you become a federal project as the non-federal sponsor, you then don't need a permit to do the work, so long as it's the authorized work within the operations and maintenance manual that we approve for us both to collectively implement. And so moving forward, should you wish to cycle sooner, you can place material so long as it's within the profile and plan of the approved project. Anything outside of that, you would need a permit. Wild Dunes, for example, if there were sections that didn't comply or didn't meet the eligibility requirements to be included in the federal project, they could get a separate permit. What happens oftentimes is they use the same contractor when they're out there because they're already mobilized. They save the mobilization money.
I have what I hope is going to be my last question. So we're waiting with bated breath for a beneficial use project to start that's pulling out of the spoil sites for the intercoastal. That's completely separate
Correct.
from whatever you're going to do. So if miraculously and amazingly, every 3 or 5 years, there's these opportunities for beneficial use, and they pump sand. That's totally separate. That could effectively be kind of supportive of our beach profile and free in this new program that you have, and then maybe you only show up every 10 years? I realize that, I said a lot there, I realize, but you know,
Yeah,
I mean, it's,
I don't know if,
I mean, if they're starting to dredge a lot and they're
If-
pumping away,
Yeah.
you know,
'cause that's
if you're already
free
a
us.
federal project, I don't know that we would then pile on our,
so we might be out of the beneficial use.
if it's within the federal project. I don't know, that's a very complicated question.
Yes, sorry.
Well, but I think.
I mean, it's a very
think-
complicated scenario, too.
Yeah, but I think it's part of what the city has to look at. If, you know, the spoil sites are going to be used for material on the beach going forward, which it sounds like it is, you know, again, do you take your chance as a city that you're going to participate in some of that going forward, just like we're getting ready to? I mean, I think that's a great question, and I think it's part of the mix.
Yep. Yeah, and I can look into that. I mean, I can ask somebody that hard question.
Is that something that is becoming more of a, I mean, I feel like we're probably not the only, if the Corps is shifting toward using that spoil, I know it's not called spoil anymore, what's it called now?
Sediment.
Well, it's dredge material.
Yeah.
Beach compatible sand?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I guess it would stand to reason that that's gonna start happening in more places.
Yeah, we're trying to, and it's not always from our disposal areas either. I mean, sometimes it is dredging an inlet and then placing that sand. Instead of placing it offshore or in a disposal area, we'll place it on a beach or on a, you
While
know.
you're dredging, yeah.
Yeah.
And that is a program we're, as an agency, really pushing to use that material, you know,
Which is great, yeah.
in a better way than just making a pile,
Right.
right? So,
It's a new thing for us, and I see it as a positive if we beneficially mined the material and then placed it near shore. And then the result was that the beach profile wasn't below the design template. Because if it's not below the design template and our renourishment cycle is ready, then we
Save-
both save
Cheap, we
money.
don't-
You
we
don't
don't
have
have-
to
yeah.
have
Mhm.
35%.
Yeah.
And so I don't see the beneficial use as a negative, but certainly please understand this is new for us. And we only see it as a positive.
So just one easy question. Very easy. This is like the easiest you're going to get, and then just one comment to the group, and I'll be quiet. The question is, if we were to decide to file a letter of intent, when is that deadline for your budget to get into the 2027 budget? So we have a general idea that we either need to work with serious haste, or we have
I think the sooner the better on getting us a letter. I mean, in the letter, and we can send you an example letter. It's, kind of a
Easy.
long letter. It's pretty easy and it's non-binding. You're not committed to anything. You're just asking us to start
looking at it and us to put into the
Yeah,
budget
to
in
put into the
3
budget.
more
We-
years. So I mean, I think that would be
We do our
something we
budgeting
should
in-
consider.
Now, like in the spring, I feel like we're putting together our packages now.
And
So
if you hear, if you could just let us, if you were to get back to the office and say, oh, we do have a hard deadline of April X or May or June, just if you could inform us, that would be great. And all I was going to do is address, there were some really good things that came up, and thank you. As regards what Philip said, particularly as regard to feasibility study, clearly we've got a long time before this would be resolved anyways. This goes to the easement, which is, I think, the feasibility study in itself is not only going to be necessary for us to know what we're going to need to do to stay above water, but also I think it'll give us the financial numbers that two things. One would be to, if we're saying we'd have to raise our taxes in order to do this ourselves, or we have to raise this much, the easement, and I definitely go back to Tim's arguments before that we need to look at the economics. Because if we have a beach that we know is going to be sustained for 50 years, I think that elevates the property value that might, in people's minds, somehow be lost with a proper, again, I haven't seen the easement, but with a fair easement, let's say. So I think that it all comes together, and that's just all I wanted to point out. And thank you.
oh, sure.
Information is so important.
Sure.
Hey, Stephen, I know you're going to need to drop at some point. Any comments you want to make before you need to do that?
Yeah, thanks. I was just putting something in the chat. Obviously it's the very beginning stages of this. There's a lot of things to think about, and I'll be happy to offer any of my thoughts and answer any questions from our end in time. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I guess, Stephen, I mean, this feasibility is folding into, some of the beach profile work we've been talking about. I mean, it would be similar work, I guess, or similar results on what we've talked about with you on what the ideal beach profile would look like.
Yeah, it's some of that. A lot of it is a slightly different approach on it, where they do a lot of modeling of storm impacts to and various dune configurations and beach widths to determine the economic impact of those storm events. So it's just a little bit different way of approaching it to determine a cost-benefit analysis. But
Gotcha.
Yep. Okay, great. And if you think of other questions, y'all can email me or, just reach out to the district in general.
Careful what you throw out
I
there.
know, right?
Yeah.
I won't necessarily email you back, but
Straight into
No, but as
Yeah.
questions come
Sorry.
up, certainly, we're happy to answer them. We love to partner. We'd love to partner in our own backyard, right? I would say we live here, but only Glenn lives nearby. But this is our home too, and so
Yeah.
we want to be able to partner here and make it last.
Douglas, you coming up for a question?
No.
Just coming up.
It's just
My
lonely.
work back there is done.
Got it. Desiree, what else from?
No, thank you so much.
Yeah,
We
you bet.
appreciate the information. It's very new for us, and there's going to be a lot of more questions coming
Yep.
your way as we evaluate, what's the best option for the city to pursue. But I think this is a great opportunity.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah, you bet. And thank you guys for the opportunity.
Anything else you got?
Folly recently had a feasibility study. We had to do, because their time was up, their 50 years or whatever, so
Wow.
I don't think it's actually been a whole 50 years. But we did do a new feasibility study for them very recently.
At their request or your need?
I think it was our need.
Gotcha.
So you could talk to them about that process.
And the town of Edisto is also pursuing.
Edisto
Yeah.
is pursuing, Polly's, I mean, those are our problem child, like, they're having problems, they're not our problem, but, like,
Nate, you've seen nothing yet.
yeah, right,
Just
buckle
wait.
up. Myrtle Beach, North Myrtle Beach, I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
we have partnered with them for a very long time, it's been very successful up there, so, you know, I encourage you to talk, I'm sure you already do.
Yeah, and Desiree's connected and Douglas too.
Is
with those
Riceville
folks.
Beach one of y'all, or is that
Riceville
different?
Beach is, I think, they either are or they are currently in feasibility, I can't remember. And that's our Wilmington district.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, talk to them too. They're not as cool as we are, but you can talk to them.
Somebody may have already asked for this, but when I we dropped off for a minute, but is it possible to get a copy of that presentation?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
post
Yeah.
that on our site too? I think this is very helpful.
Yeah, Desiree will grab it, or we'll grab it and get it to everybody.
Yeah,
Because there's
sure.
a couple of folks not here today.
Okay.
Army Corps, thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
A few more minutes to talk to each other.
We're just going to talk about you.
Can we put these meetings on like a live, like a television, like at the entrance to the island? I can't tell you how many people have been asking questions, and I'm like.
As a
you should-
result of?
You should no, you should really watch.
Oh, yeah.
A lot
With
of
you.
people are watching them.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we need to get more people
We
to
have
watch
two
them.
live right now.
Welcome.
But they ask me afterwards. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
like Dan, like who couldn't be, I know you, but we get
These have been great. I mean, yeah.
questions from people who've gone back and watched them afterwards, which is
I don't know that we're not doing this, but I think it would also be helpful maybe to put all the materials that we've had to date, whether they came from Stephen or Nancy,
They usually are, yeah.
on the
Yeah.
beach
They're
restoration
out there.
page, on our homepage.
We can do that. They're currently posted next to the agendas as other files, but we can link it to our beach restoration reverse chronology. I think that'd be good.
So thinking about next meeting, I know last week we had talked about meeting and starting to put, we'll see you soon. Glenn, thank you all.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, everyone.
Last meeting, we had talked about, starting to put some strategy around the document and such. Now, Elizabeth, we still have this tax district advice and help we may need if that's a path we go down. Are we ready to, next week or the next, to start putting some strategy document together based on what we've heard? Or is there a need for additional folks we need to bring in from y'all's view? Or what's your thought? This was a lot of good info today.
No,
but-
my thought is regardless of whether or not there's other people we need to bring in, I think that we need to have just a meeting together to, share thoughts as to
Yeah.
what we've learned so far.
I
We've
don't
learned a
disagree.
lot. It's really important, and probably try to decide on some things that we can start to move forward with that are within the confines of this, like maybe getting some bids for getting some plans, things like that, that don't necessarily cost anything to get that information. So
Yeah.
that would be my thought, but I'm just one person.
And like,
Go ahead.
the letter,
Mhm.
I mean, I assume that
There's no
needs
downside.
to go to all council, or is that something that we can just send out the letter and say, please help us, maybe?
I know we got a meeting coming up, so we could do it either way, but
Yeah, I think this committee next week can come up with a recommendation. We can present it to council to submit a letter, as
Sounds like
as
there's-
this work is ongoing, that was
Right.
something that seems like time critical potentially, that we think there's no downside in submitting. I would, certainly be encouraged to do that.
It may help flesh out any naysayers as well. I mean, if, depending on how it's received. Hate to bring that up, but.
The reality that we live in.
yeah, so that would work time-wise for a council meeting, because if we met next Friday, if people are good with that, next Friday, 19th.
I think so.
And I think the last meeting we had where we were just fleshing out what we had talked about, it was very successful. I think
Yeah.
having an opportunity to dissect and digest a lot of the information that we've gotten and start putting some structure to what the deliverable will be. And identify where are some of the holes that we have not heard about that we should pursue.
Yeah. Yeah, I think taking a breath and having a conversation amongst ourselves is a good idea to start putting some meat around this.
So is the council meeting next Tuesday?
23rd.
The 23rd,
Yeah.
so we have one more meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, I
So
just
it'd be
wanted to make sure
perfect.
that you
Yeah.
all knew what, Thank you.
Yeah.
What needed to, right.
It'll work. Yeah, and I don't know that we necessarily need council approval to send this Army Corps letter, but might as well get it, to your point, flush it out. Again, no downside. 10 o'clock on the dot.
Well done.
Adjourn.
Thank you.
All in
Sure.
favor?
Aye.
10 o'clock. Thank you all.
That was really, every meeting has been so informative.
Thank you, Douglas.
Thank you.
Don't say anything yet.
Yeah.
Long press.
That was positive. Yeah.